when you're facing very difficult challenges, whether it's personally or professionally or as a globe, your ingenuity is accelerated, supercharged. And I think that's what's come through here, whether it's in the power of science, in the power of, as Stephanie said, of coming together. We prove that you can run large multinational corporations and companies like our own in a very effective and dynamic way.
Hello and welcome back to CommsLife for our third season. I'm your host, Tom Billinghurst. Every episode, we explore the topics and trends shaping the communications industry and beyond. As the fallout from the pandemic continues to evolve, the way we move, interact, and do business has been forever altered, and the travel industry has encountered and embraced substantial change along the way. For business travelers, what was once commonplace, a ticket purchase, pass-through security, and a stop by concessions, faced extended pause. For industry leaders, raising the bar on health and safety standards was first in order. But what does this mean for the future of business travel generally, and what impact does that have on our line of work, communications? Joining me to discuss these questions and more are Stephanie Waties, Senior Director in APCO Worldwide's Washington, D.C. office, and Licy DoCanto, Managing Director of those headquarters of APCO in Washington, D.C. Thank you both very much for joining us.
Great to be here.
Good to see you.
Thanks very much for taking the time out of what is, I can only imagine, to be a very hectic schedule over there stateside. So the opening gambit to this episode was actually taken from a recent article which you, Stephanie, co-authored, which was first published on the Washington Business Journal, and the result of a partnership between APCO and the Washington Board of Trade. So before I delve into your involvement in this, Stephanie, I want to come to you, Licy, as a way to kickstart this conversation, and wonder if you can give us a bit of context as to what the reason for this partnership with the Washington Board of Trade has been, and what were the key takeaways?
Thanks, Thomas. We, APCO, are known as a global public relations and public affairs firm with offices around the world, working across virtually every part of industry and sector. But we're also the only independently owned, woman-founded, and employee-operated agency here in Washington, D.C. Institutionally and personally, we, APCO, have been giving to the Washington, D.C. community for a very long time and have been very committed to the region in very unique ways. One of those ways is through our longtime intimate partnership with the Greater Washington Board of Trade. As you may know, and as our listeners may know, for over 130 years, the Board of Trade has represented all of the industries across the greater DMV. They are the most diverse and vibrant professional membership community in this region and have used what we think is their tremendous nonpartisan convening power to drive smart and innovative solutions for inclusive and equitable growth across the greater DC region. These principles of inclusivity, equity, and diversity, as well as bipartisanship, are at the heart of who we are at APCO, and we're proud of our relationship with the Greater Board of Trade and to be working together with them to lift up and drive these principles forward across our region.
Fantastic. I like the way that the values of the two entities chime nicely together. It's a great fit. So Stephanie, coming back to this piece that you authored, which was anchored in this partnership with the Washington Board of Trade, why was this partnership important from your perspective in terms of informing the work that we're doing at APCO Worldwide?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I can echo Licy's comments and also look back in time to say that the firm has been really involved in sort of the evolution of travel and meetings for over a decade, and partnerships with organizations like the Board of Trade, like the U.S. Travel Association. So when we think about how this informs our work, it's pretty seamless. And with Board of Trade, it really was an opportunity to come together to think about the future of work in the context of business travel, and to really think about how we showcase some of the insights that we're talking with leaders about on a regular basis and bringing them to bear not only for the travel and broader transportation industries, but for business. So a lot of the things that we're seeing as far as trends are concerned, as far as implications, as far as trend spotting for the future, are relevant to the business community at large. And APCO certainly brings that to bear in the clients that we work with, but Board of Trade similarly brings a pretty robust set of folks in terms of members and engaged partners. So it was really a nice meeting of the minds with this project in particular.
So I want to stick with you on this and kind of filter down, if we can, on the topic that you've authored on global business travel, and just look at it for a second with an international lens. There was a report that I was reading before coming on air with you guys that in 2020, global business travel expenses contracted by 52%, which is not insignificant. And there is a recovery in motion. We're seeing, especially in the Middle East, we're seeing more people traveling back here for business and returning to events, which is great to see. But while the recovery is underway, it's predicted to be long and uneven. So, Stephanie, what impact have we seen on global business travel, and how does what we've been through and where we are, how is that going to shape the future of travel, perhaps in specific regards to the role of sectors that are associated with travel, like energy, and how do these also fit into the narratives around health and safety and climate change?
Yeah, I mean, this is the million-dollar question, right? And if we all had a crystal ball, we probably have more answers than questions at this point. But it's most experts' expectation that 2024 is what we're looking at in terms of business travel returning at a global scale. Obviously, to use your word, uneven. It's going to be in waves. It's going to be dependent upon the how sort of the pandemic progresses, how government actors work together with corporate actors and association leaders to sort of set the tone and collaborate on solutions that are going to work. But that is a bit of the expectation, and also that leisure travel will lead the way. So we see a bit of that already. Yes, there are steps forward and steps back. But at the end of the day, we do know, and APCO's done research over the last 2 years to show this in a consistent way, that people do want to meet face to face, that they do want to see parts of the world that perhaps they didn't have access to over the last 2 years. So really the puzzle pieces are about how, in addition to when, right? So when we look at areas like sustainability, what we've seen particularly during this pandemic is you see the impacts. You see corporate leaders in particular stepping forward and making big commitments. And the questions sort of intermingled in this are those commitments enough, particularly for folks who are leading the charge on climate change and sustainability conversations? And then it'll be equally interesting to see, how does this success get measured, and how are those commitments sort of delivered upon, not just at the corporate level, but sort of broadly speaking, and perhaps optimistically, but hopefully also realistically, there's the balance, right? So there is some commentary from, I believe, the Delta CEO in the last few weeks or so that sort of acknowledges the dual need and the possibility of being able to see the world and save the world, right? So as things move forward, it'll be interesting to look at not just the dynamics of airlines and aviation, but the whole sort of ecosystem. So looking at rail, looking at sort of broader ground transportation, what's happening in the automotive space around electrification, for example, how cruise lines are playing into the mix on this, and sort of the broader maritime industry, because it's going to require that collective approach and not necessarily looking at individual segments as individual segments or individual companies. So easy enough to raise all of these questions, but this is where the focus is, and this will be a huge determining factor in what it looks like when we talk about the future of business travel. So my hope is that they're answered sooner rather than later, but we will see.
I think the fascinating thing there that you touch on is how interconnected everything is now, and especially working at a firm like APCO's, where we have representation all over the world. You see how interconnected that nexus is, and how contingent so many regions are on everything getting back up and running and on its feet. On which note, Licy, I want to look at this now from a communications perspective. We've seen how, with the restrictions on travel and the rise of virtual platforms like Zoom, as an example, fewer journalists are traveling to, let's say, the Middle East for an event if they're covering it from the US or the UK, because of either they want to reduce their carbon footprint. Travel might be possible under business pretenses, but they're cutting back for that reason. As just one example of the kind of ripple effect that this disruption has had on communications. Part of what we do is media relations and getting people to and from events, and we've pivoted to virtual platforms. So for a firm like APCO, headquartered in DC, where you're the managing director, how has this affected the way that we do work?
Great question, Thomas. Since the pandemic began, we've all seen profound changes in the way that people connect and they do business with each other. There's no question the world and its workforce have learned quite suddenly and quite acutely how to be flexible in many capacities, whether that's in person or online. And personally, here in Washington, D.C., I have been constantly impressed with the way in which we, APCO, have been both resilient and innovative in our company and how we've navigated this balance. As I wrote recently in a blog on this topic, business travel for us, as it is for many, has always been a key part of our work and in the office culture here. It's allowed us to meet and connect with our colleagues around the world, and that connection of travel has helped to drive our success. I am very hopeful and confident that we are going to return to a world where even more of this kind of interactivity is going to take place. But look, I also, together with many, have seen very directly how important and how valuable it is of the nature of remote work and engagement. That isn't going to go away. It shouldn't go away as we emerge from the pandemic.
So it's a fascinating one, isn't it? And Stephanie, the same question to you, I guess, because you're working on other aspects of the industry. So I put the same to you in terms of how relationships with clients, the work we do, campaigns, how have you seen those pivot to embrace this new world?
Yeah, everything is being revisited. In terms of how it's relevant to our business, I mean, we are a people business. We work very directly with clients and one another, and we are building campaigns that impact different constituencies, that impact people. So it's particularly important. So I've seen a number of ways that the industry, that APCO has pivoted in ways to suit where we are at any given time in the pandemic. And it is sort of a mix. And while in some places you would see a totally remote environment, I personally have done a little bit of business travel. I've done some very professionally and safely managed in-person meetings and events. And really the ability to adapt has been a cornerstone of all of this. And whether we sort of emerge in a place that is more in-person than it is hybrid, than it is virtual, is anybody's guess. But you do see some of these trends, not only in our industry, but in some of the more traditional areas of business that maybe you wouldn't expect, where you see some of this movement. So I'm hopeful that we'll all be together sooner rather than later, but it is sort of creating new standards and ways of thinking as it relates to business.
Absolutely. I think what's also fascinating about this topic, I mentioned it earlier about us being a very vast and sprawling network of colleagues, is the way that from the strategic level of communications all the way down to the executional day-to-day work, whether it's social media calendars, talking points, speeches for clients, the language and the tonality and even the reference points now, we're referring to this pandemic in a way that as an audience, whoever your stakeholders are, there is a great deal of empathy for what we've been through. And there's a connection there, which when you come out on the other side of it, is a point of reference of bonding and understanding. We've gone through this together. Now, how do we move forward together? So it's been a fascinating thing to watch unfold over here in the Middle East and certainly in the US. And that, Licy, brings me to the fact that you joined APCO pretty much in the eye of the storm just about last year. So it'd be fascinating to get your perspective on the things that you've seen done well since coming on board, examples of best practices, people that have adapted well, and what could be done better.
That's a great question. You're absolutely right. I guess I was at the eye of the storm, but I will answer that question in three ways. Number one, personally, for me, I think starting in the midst of the pandemic was the most impactful way to start this role. And it allowed me, because the world slowed down, to meet leaders from around the world that I wouldn't otherwise had the opportunity to do it had they been preoccupied with travel and such. The second part, how I'd answer the question is I think about what BlackRock CEO Larry Fink said in his note to CEOs last month, and he said to all the CEOs, "How are you adapting to the change taking place in the world?" And in the one point, which I thought was brilliant for him to make, was there's no more important relationship that has fundamentally changed than the one between employees and employers. We certainly have experienced this at APCO, and certainly companies around the world, in whatever shape or size, whatever part of the economy sector, have all experienced that. And what we've seen, and I'm very proud of the work that we've been doing at APCO, is a great emphasis on mental health, on how we are interacting and connecting with one another, on questions around racial equity and fairness. And those aren't issues that we APCO in our nearly 40 years have just learned as of recent. Those are things that have been at the center of who we are, given how we were founded, and to the points that I made earlier in terms of being independently owned, employee operated, and women founded. So I'm very proud that we continue to help lead in that way. When I look out into the industry, to answer it in the third way, I think about how, as a matter of fact, companies, employers, and all of us have had to adapt. We've had to change. We've had to pivot in so many ways that to allow us to move forward. And I think I've been very impressed, for example, with the work that the retail and hospitality industry has done. For example, with Marriott International, they at the start of the pandemic immediately rolled out what they called a commitment to clean, right? These set of standards that if you've stayed in a hotel recently, no matter where you are in the world, and Marriott isn't alone here, but they were very quick to jump out, sort of the visual signs and protocols that ensure guest safety, right? And show the procedures that they have in place. And they saw quite smartly that as guests became more comfortable with travel again, they were more inclined to tell other people about their experience and to consider future travel. And so they have been able to, as I think others in that particular industry, adapt to this bleisure notion, if you will, the blended business and leisure travel. And then they've developed these packages around it so that people can work and stay and play, sort of that blended nature. And I think there's been many a positive change elsewhere in different parts of the economy and how businesses have adapted. There's no question, if you haven't been a company or a leader within our economy that has adapted with what has been happening around you, well, Tom, you can read about those companies because those folks aren't around so much anymore. And we spend a lot of time sitting around the tables of corporate corporations and with leaders, helping them to navigate the real challenges that they face. And again, going back to what Larry Fink said, which is the ultimate way in which I think companies will continue to be successful moving forward, is if they get right that relationship between the employer and the employee.
We hope you're enjoying this APCO Worldwide production. To find out more of what we do in the communication space, head to apcoworldwide.com and see how we are helping firms build back stronger.
Welcome back to CommsLife. We're still here with Stephanie Waties and Licy DoCanto. In this part of the podcast, we want to get a little bit closer and look at the people beneath the professionals. So we've got some getting to know you questions here. And this time we're going to stay on the theme of the episode, which is the future of travel. So if you're both ready, I'm going to throw some of these at you.
Ready.
Fire away, Thomas. Excited.
As always, Licy. Okay, coming first to Stephanie. Stephanie, what was the thing you missed most about travel during the restrictions?
I think it's the people, and we've talked about the value of having little tiny boxes on the screen. It doesn't do some of those relationships justice. So I would say just being able to interact with people in a different way. And
to you, Licy?
Yeah, I mean, human connection and the power of it. There's no shortcut. I think for me, and I think for all of us, missing that interaction, that connectivity, and the opportunity that it provides for those who are able to do it is important. But whether that's in your neighborhood, and remember that there are long periods of time where with even going outside of your house was a challenge or a risk, and even seeing your family members and friends was challenging. So the power of human connection, the power of just being together physically is what I missed during the time of these travel restrictions.
Fabulous. People. It's a people business. It shows. Second question, coming back to you, Stephanie. The place that you missed most traveling to and why?
So this is a very personal answer, in that I've had the opportunity to go, whether it's business travel or leisure. Personally, I had high hopes right before the pandemic of taking a big trip over to Italy that I am hopeful is still in my near future, but less about work in that context, but hopefully can make it happen very soon.
If nothing other than for the pizza and the Colosseum, right?
Exactly. You took the words right out.
Maybe a bit more to it than that. Yeah. Licy, where have you missed traveling to the most?
It's an interesting question. I think like most, I miss going to places that I have traveled to and had the opportunity to travel to a lot over my time, and that's various parts of the country and even abroad. But really, what I miss that place is that place of being able to be together with people, whether that's in a bar, whether that's in a restaurant, whether that's in someone's home. That's the place that I've missed the most, because that's what is so missing in this time right now. And anyone during this time who has gone without being able to see their loved ones or friends, or those people that are very special in their lives, they know what we're talking about here. And that could be any place in the world.
Beautiful. Final question, coming back to you, Stephanie. The silver lining of the pandemic when it comes to our ways of working.
I'd have to come back to options. And there were options, including work from home, which I really didn't do prior to the pandemic. And, I think everyone's hope is that as things evolve, I don't know that we're going to see a return to the way things were. In fact, I don't believe we're going to see a full return to the way things were. But I do think there's been a lot of work to create options that perhaps weren't as, that didn't exist, or that weren't as relied upon in terms of how we work and how we engage with others. And I think one good thing that will come out of this is that we haven't perfected these systems, but we're sort of working through them in ways that are productive and efficient, and finding solutions where we didn't have to look before. So I think the big thing for me, if there is a silver lining in this, is being able to explore the options of how we engage with one another and how we do work day to day.
Perfect. Licy, wrap it up for us. The silver lining of the pandemic.
I think about this question, and I think about, if there's one thing that we all learned, all of us, not just here in the US, but around the globe, is the power of when we come together and collaborate, we can do amazing things. And that's always been something that I think we've known about, but who thought that in less than 2 years that we could have a vaccine that would help save many, many lives? When you're facing very difficult challenges, whether it's personally or professionally or as a globe, your ingenuity is accelerated, supercharged. And I think that's what's come through here, whether it's in the power of science and the power of, as Stephanie said, of coming together. We prove that you can run large multinational corporations and companies like our own in a very effective and dynamic way. And it's okay, as much as we don't like to live in a box on occasion. So I think it proved that we've always had this capacity to do better. If we leaned into who we are and to be inclusive and to fight for what's right. These are things that we're still working at, but I have said that without this pandemic and everything that's come along with it, this world would not be where it is today. And so we've learned that we can make good change. We can make tomorrow different than today by leaning into the very things that we had before the pandemic that we realized that we hadn't really been using beforehand. And that's the people and us and all the work that we can do together. That's how I see the lessons coming out of the pandemic. My hope is, and I'm confident, that's one that we won't ever forget.
Leaning into a better tomorrow. Perfect way to wrap up. Stephanie, Licy, thank you both so much for joining us on CommsLife. Thanks for listening to CommsLife. If you liked that, leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. Send us any questions or comments on our Twitter page. And while you're at it, you can subscribe to and download CommsLife on our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts from. Stay safe and be well.